Admiral Velthar of the Korthak Empire stood before the massive holographic display in the war room, his three red eyes scanning the classified briefing materials that floated in mid-air. The crimson glow of the ship's interior lighting cast long ominous shadows across his scaled reptilian features as he carefully reviewed each intelligence report. His flagship, the Dominator, was the pride of the Korthak Third Fleet, a massive dreadnought that had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade alone. "Commander Zixon," he called to his second-in-command, his voice echoing through the metallic corridors of the bridge. "What is the meaning of these peculiar directives from High Command?" The younger officer stepped forward, his insect-like mandibles clicking nervously as he approached. Zixon had served under Velthar for 8 years, and he had never seen his superior question orders from above. "Sir, High Command has issued absolute protocols regarding the species designated as humans. All fleet commanders across the Empire are ordered to avoid engagement at any cost." Velthar's laugh was a harsh, guttural sound that made the bridge crew shift uncomfortably at their stations. "Avoid? These soft-skinned creatures have been crawling around in space for barely 50 rotations of their pathetic little world. What possible threat could they pose to the unstoppable might of the Korthak Third Fleet?" The Admiral's massive clawed hand gestured dismissively at the holographic data. For 300 years, the Korthak Empire had expanded across the galaxy, crushing every species that dared oppose them. Their technology was superior, their warriors were bred for battle, and their ships were the most feared sight in known space. The idea that they should fear some primitive newcomers seemed absolutely ridiculous. Zixon hesitated before activating the holographic files. Images of human vessels suddenly filled the air around them, crude patchwork ships that looked more like flying scrapyards than proper warships. The vessels appeared to be cobbled together from salvaged parts, mismatched hull plating, and what looked like civilian technology jury-rigged for combat. "Intelligence suggests they possess unusual tactical capabilities, sir," Zixon said carefully, watching his commander's reaction. "There are disturbing reports of impossible alliances forming wherever humans establish their colonies. Species that have been enemies for centuries are somehow working together after human contact." Velthar studied the images more closely, his predatory instincts analyzing potential weaknesses. The human ships looked fragile, their weapons appeared outdated, and their armor seemed laughably thin compared to Korthak battle cruisers. "Show me their fleet compositions," he demanded. More holograms materialized, displaying tactical formations and ship classifications. What Velthar saw only reinforced his contempt. Human fleets were a chaotic mix of different vessel types, with no apparent standardization. Some ships looked like converted cargo haulers, others appeared to be modified mining equipment, and a few seemed to be actual warships that had been heavily modified with additional weapons and armor. "This is what has our High Command trembling." "Send fear?" Velthar asked incredulously. "These ramshackle collections of space junk?" Zixon pulled up additional intelligence reports, his mandibles clicking more rapidly as he accessed the classified files. "Sir, there have been 7 separate incidents where Korthak patrol vessels encountered human colonies. In each case, our ships found themselves facing not just humans, but coalition forces composed of multiple species." "Coalition forces?" Velthar's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Explain." "The Zenthari were at war with the Lixtar for over 2 centuries, sir. Blood feuds, territorial disputes, religious conflicts. They would attack each other on sight. But when Captain General Noxtar attempted to raid a human mining outpost in the Kepler sector, both Zenthari and Lixtar ships appeared to defend the humans. They fought side by side, sir, against us." Velthar's scaled brow furrowed as he processed this information. The Zenthari were known as fierce warriors with advanced weaponry, while the Lixtar possessed powerful psychic abilities that could disable enemy ships. The thought of these two species cooperating was disturbing, but not impossible if they saw mutual benefit. "Perhaps they struck some kind of trade agreement," he suggested. "Resources, technology exchange, territorial concessions." Zixon shook, his head accessing more files. "That's what we initially believed, sir, but the pattern keeps repeating. The Void Runners, pirates who trust absolutely no one, have been spotted defending human cargo convoys. The isolationist Kexani, who haven't left their home system in 50 years, sent a battle fleet to assist a human research station under attack by raiders. The Admiral's third eye, located in the center of his forehead, began to glow with a dangerous red light, a sign of deep concentration and growing anger. There must be some form of coercion involved, mind control technology perhaps, or economic leverage. Our intelligence analysts considered those possibilities, sir, Zixon continued, pulling up more detailed reports. But intercepted communications suggest something else entirely. The alien species seem genuinely fond of the humans. They speak of them with what can only be described as affection. Velthar stood motionless for long moments, his three eyes processing the implications. In his experience, interstellar politics operated on simple principles. Strength dominated weakness, fear ensured obedience, and self-interest drove all decisions. The idea that multiple species would risk their lives to protect humans out of genuine loyalty challenged everything he understood about galactic civilization. "Show me the combat footage," he ordered finally. The holographic display shifted to show actual battle recordings. Velthar watched as human ships maneuvered alongside alien vessels in perfect coordination. There was no hesitation, no confusion about chain of command, no territorial disputes over battlefield positioning. The mixed fleets moved like a single organism, each species' unique capabilities complementing the others perfectly. Superstition, Velthar dismissed with a sharp wave of his clawed hand, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Fear makes cowards of even our high command. These humans have clearly developed some new form of manipulation technology, perhaps pheromone-based or subliminal frequency broadcasting. He turned away from the holographic display and strode toward the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the bridge. Beyond the reinforced transparent aluminum, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, these mysterious humans were apparently weaving webs of alliance that threatened the natural order of galactic power. "Sir," Zixon said hesitantly, "High Command was very specific about the no-engagement order. Perhaps we should prepare the fleet for standard patrol," Velthar interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of absolute command. "If we encounter these humans, we shall demonstrate exactly why the galaxy fears the Korthak name. Let them bring their coalition friends. We'll crush them all together and send a clear message about the price of opposing our empire." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the ship's massive engines and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. The crew exchanged nervous glances but began carrying out their orders with practiced efficiency. They had served under Admiral Velthar long enough to know that questioning his decisions was a career-ending mistake. Unknown to Velthar, his decision to disregard High Command's warnings had already sealed his fate and the fate of every ship under his command. In the depths of space, forces were already moving that would soon teach the Korthak Empire a lesson about the true nature of human strength. The Third Fleet continued its patrol route, heading directly toward an encounter that would change the balance of power in their sector forever. 3 days later, the massive Korthak Third Fleet cruised through the dark void of space when their long-range sensors picked up something unusual. Lieutenant Krixal, hunched over his scanning station, suddenly straightened with alarm. "Admiral, we're detecting an anomalous signature in Sector 7 Alpha," he reported, his voice cutting through the steady hum of the bridge. Admiral Velthar rose from his command throne, a massive chair carved from the bones of some extinct alien beast. His 3 red eyes focused on the main tactical display as it zoomed in on the detected object. A single vessel drifted near the edge of a dense asteroid field, its hull scarred and patched like a veteran of countless battles across the galaxy. Das Shay. Ship was small, maybe a tenth the size of Velthar's flagship, and it looked like it had been through hell and back. Burn marks covered its hull. Mismatched metal plates had been welded over what were obviously old battle damage, and jury-rigged equipment sprouted from its surface like mechanical growths. Despite its battered appearance, the vessel's engines glowed with a steady blue light, indicating it was very much alive and operational. "Identification," Velthar demanded, his clawed fingers gripping the armrests of his throne. Commander Zixan worked frantically at the sensor controls, his mandibles clicking as he processed the incoming data. Human research vessel, sir? Designation? Resilience. Crew complement reads as 12 individuals. Minimal armament detected. Standard scientific equipment, geological survey gear, basic defensive shields. Zixon paused, studying his readings more carefully. Something about the energy signatures didn't quite match what he expected from a simple research vessel. Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies. Wide-spectrum transmission. Very powerful signal for a ship that size. Velthar's predatory. Instincts began to stir as he studied the lone vessel. This was absolutely perfect. A single human ship, isolated and outnumbered, with no backup in sight. He could eliminate these soft-skinned creatures quickly and efficiently, proving to his crew and high command that humans posed no real threat to Korthak supremacy. Put them on screen, he ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what appeared to be a cramped but well-organized ship's bridge, and there, standing calmly in the center of the frame, was a human being. Velthar had seen images of humans in the intelligence briefings, but this was his first time observing one in real time. The creature was surprisingly young-looking, with smooth skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical style. What struck him most were the human's eyes, kind and intelligent, but with depths that suggested someone who had seen more than their fair share of trouble. The human wore a simple uniform marked with symbols Velthar didn't recognize, along with what appeared to be rank insignia. "This is Captain Boram of the survey ship Resilience," the human said in a calm, steady voice that somehow carried across the vast distance between their vessels. "We are conducting mineral surveys in unclaimed space under the Galactic Survey Treaty of 2387. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." Velthar was impressed despite himself. Most species, he encountered either cowered in terror or immediately attacked when faced with a Korthak battle fleet. This human showed neither fear nor aggression, just professional curiosity mixed with cautious alertness. He felt his predator instincts fully awaken now. This was going to be even more satisfying than he had anticipated. A quick demonstration of Korthak superiority with no witnesses to complicate the aftermath. "Target their engines," he commanded quietly to his weapons officer. "Prepare boarding parties. We'll take the ship intact and interrogate the crew before disposal." But as the Korthak weapon systems began to lock onto the small research vessel, Captain Boram's next words stopped Velthar cold. "To any friendly vessels monitoring this channel," the human captain continued, still speaking in that same calm tone, "we have encountered an unknown military force of significant size. Our current coordinates are being transmitted along with this message. We are attempting peaceful contact, but..." There was a slight pause, and something shifted in those intelligent eyes. "We might not make it out of this one." Velthar realized with growing alarm that the message wasn't just being broadcast to human space. The transmission was going out, on every known frequency, in every major galactic language, to every corner of the sector. The human ship's communications array was far more powerful than it had any right to be. "Sir," Zixan's voice carried a note of genuine alarm, "I'm detecting multiple hyperspace distortions. Something big is coming through FTL." The tactical display suddenly lit up like a festival celebration as ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace around them. Velthar stared at the impossible sight unfolding before his eyes. This couldn't be happening. First came a Zenthari heavy cruiser, its distinctive angular hull bristling with plasma weapons. Then a squadron of nimble Lixtar fighters, their organic-looking ships pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. A massive Kexani dreadnought materialized next, followed by ships Velthar had never seen before, vessels with hull designs that belonged to species he couldn't even identify. But the real shock came when he recognized some of the other arrivals. 3 ships bearing the skull and crossbones markings of the notorious Void Runners, pirates who trusted absolutely no one and answered only to profit. Herr Thekanari diplomatic vessel, from a species known for their complete neutrality in all conflicts. Even a Silthani pleasure yacht of all things, its crew apparently willing to risk their lives for reasons Velthar couldn't begin to understand. "How many ships?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 43 and counting, sir," Zixon reported, his own voice shaking slightly. More are still arriving. I'm reading at least 12 different species, and some of these energy signatures I don't recognize at all. On the main screen, Captain Boram's expression had shifted from cautious alertness to something that looked almost like relief. She turned to speak with someone off camera, and Velthar caught fragments of rapid conversation in multiple languages. "Admiral," the human captain addressed him directly, somehow knowing his rank despite the fact that they had never been introduced. "I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated than either of us might have preferred. Perhaps we could discuss this peacefully." Velthar looked around at his bridge crew, seeing his own confusion reflected in their faces. In 3 centuries of Korthak expansion, nothing like this had ever happened. Species didn't just drop everything and rush to help strangers. The galaxy didn't work that way. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from the arriving vessels. They're asking about the humans' welfare." The impossible fleet continued to grow as more ships arrived from hyperspace. Each new arrival seemed to represent a different species, a different culture, a different corner of the galaxy. Yet somehow they all shared one thing in common: an apparent willingness to risk everything to protect a single human research vessel. Velthar realized with growing dread that his simple demonstration of Korthak power had turned into something far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The humans hadn't conquered this part of space through superior technology or military might. They had done something far more terrifying. They had made friends. Within minutes, the empty darkness of space around the Korthak Third Fleet transformed into something that resembled the busiest spaceport in the galaxy. Ship after ship continued dropping out of hyperspace, their arrival flashes creating a light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Velthar watched in growing horror as his tactical display struggled to keep up with the identifications. Each new arrival made the situation more impossible to believe. Zenthari cargo haulers, massive vessels designed for trade, not war, materialized alongside their sleek military escorts. Lixta patrol boats, with their distinctive organic curves and pulsing biolights, formed defensive formations around the human research vessel. But what truly shook Velthar to his core were the ships bearing the dreaded skull and crossbones, markings of the Void Runners. These weren't just any pirates. They were the most feared raiders in 3 sectors, creatures who trusted absolutely no one and answered to nothing but profit and self-preservation. Yet here they were, their black-hulled vessels bristling with illegal weapons, apparently ready to defend a human ship they had no logical reason to care about. "How is this possible?" he whispered, his 3 eyes scanning the impossible sight before him. Commander Zixan was frantically working at his station, trying to make sense of the tactical situation. "Sir, I'm counting 67 vessels now, representing at least 15 different species. Some of these ships were fighting each other just last month according to our intelligence reports." The main view screen flickered, and Captain Boram's face reappeared. But this time, she wasn't alone on her bridge. Standing beside her was a towering Zenthari captain, his reptilian features marked with the traditional ceremonial scars that indicated he had survived at least 20 major battles. His massive frame filled the left side of the screen, and his eyes burned with the fierce loyalty of a warrior who had found something worth protecting. On the human captain's right stood a Lixtar warrior, her neural tendrils glowing with the soft blue light that indicated high emotional state, in this case battle readiness. The Lixtar were known across the galaxy for their powerful psychic abilities and their absolute honesty in all dealings. If one of them was prepared to fight for humans, it meant their commitment was genuine. Behind them, Velthar could see other figures moving around the bridge, more aliens working alongside the human crew, with the easy familiarity of old friends rather than temporary allies. "Admiral Velthar of the Korthak Empire," Captain Boram said, and the casual way she used his name and rank sent a chill down his spine. How did she know who he was? "You have 2 options available to you right now. Withdraw your fleet and return to Korthak space, or explain to your high command why you decided to start a war with half the sector." Before Velthar could respond, the Zenthari captain stepped forward, his massive clawed hand resting protectively on Boram's shoulder. When he spoke, His translation unit crackled with the effort of converting his deep, rumbling voice into standard galactic. "I am Captain Thexmar of the cargo vessel, Prosperity," the Zenthari declared, his scarred features twisted into an expression of absolute determination. 3 years ago, the human Boram helped evacuate my colony when the solar storms came. She risked her own ship, her own crew, to save Zenthari children she had never met. No Korthak touches her, while blood still flows in my veins. The Lixtar warrior moved forward next, her neural tendrils now glowing so brightly they cast shadows on the bridge walls. When she spoke, her mental voice echoed directly through the communication system with the eerie clarity that only Lixtar telepathy could provide. "I am Warsinger Yithara of the patrol ship Mindreach." Her psychic voice resonated through every speaker on Velthar's flagship. "When plague struck our nursery worlds, when our younglings were dying and no one would help because they feared contamination, Captain Boram traded her ship's entire supply of life support filters to save our children. She breathed recycled air for 2 months while we rebuilt our medical facilities. We stand with humanity because humanity stood with us when the darkness came." One by one, more captains appeared on the screen or transmitted their own messages. Each told a similar story, and each story hit Velthar like a physical blow. A grizzled Void Runner captain, his cybernetic implants gleaming in the low light of his ship's bridge, transmitted from his raider vessel. "Name's Kextor, and I don't normally do the hero thing, but Boram's crew pulled my people out of a collapsing asteroid mine when nobody else would risk it. Said something about all sentient life being precious. Crazy human thinking, but I respect it." A Kexani diplomat, speaking from the bridge of a ship that hadn't left their home system in 50 years, added his voice. "Captain Boram mediated the peace talks between our colony and the Teknari settlements. She worked for 6 months without payment, sleeping in supply closets, eating ration bars, just to help 2 species learn to live together. The Kexani remember our debts." Even more impossible was the transmission from a Silthani pleasure yacht, its captain speaking in the musical tones characteristic of their species. "Dear Boram helped my daughter when her ship broke down in the neutral zone. Pirates everywhere, no rescue coming, but this wonderful human risked everything to fix our engines and escort us to safety. We may not be warriors, but we will not abandon our friends." The stories kept coming, each more incredible than the last. Tales of humans sharing their food with hungry refugees, fixing broken ships for free, mediating disputes between ancient enemies, and always, always, extending help to strangers without asking for anything in return. Velthar felt his understanding of the galaxy crumbling around him. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had seen species cooperate only when threatened by a common enemy or when bound by profitable treaties. The idea that multiple civilizations would risk everything, based on simple gratitude and friendship, seemed to violate every law of interstellar relations. "This is impossible," he muttered, but the evidence surrounded him on all sides. Ships that should have been fighting each other were instead forming a protective barrier around a single human vessel. Ancient enemies stood side by side, their weapons trained on his fleet instead of each other. Captain Boram's voice cut through his confusion. "Admiral, you're a military man. You understand tactics and strategy. Look at your situation. Really look at it. You came here expecting to find a helpless research vessel. Instead, you found something that threatens everything your empire believes about how the galaxy works." She was right, and Velthar knew it. His fleet was powerful, but they were now outnumbered 3 to 1 by ships whose crews were fighting for something more powerful than orders or conquest. They were fighting for friendship. The Admiral's third eye began to glow with dangerous red light as his anger finally overcame his shock. He had spent his entire life believing that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. The idea that these soft-skinned humans had somehow made themselves powerful through simple kindness was an insult to everything he represented. "Impossible," he snarled, his voice carrying through the bridge like a war cry. "Battle stations. Hull ships, attack formation." Commander Zixon turned to stare at his superior in shock. "Sir, we're outnumbered 3 to 1, and some of those ships carry weapons we've never seen before." "I don't care," Velthar roared. his claws extending as battle rage took hold. The Korthak Empire does not retreat from soft-skinned weaklings and their pet aliens. We will show them why the galaxy fears our name. The die was cast. There could be no retreat from this madness, no backing down from what had become a test of everything the Korthak Empire stood for. In the depths of space, two completely different philosophies of power were about to collide in a battle that would determine the future of their entire sector. The war between strength and friendship was about to begin. Within minutes, the empty darkness of space around the Korthak Third Fleet transformed into something that looked like the galaxy's most impossible gathering. Ship after ship continued materializing from hyperspace jumps, their arrival creating brilliant flashes of light that illuminated the asteroid field like fireworks at a celebration. Velthar gripped the armrests of his command throne so tightly that his claws left deep gouges in the ancient bone. His tactical display was going crazy, struggling to identify and catalog each new arrival. The computer systems, designed to track enemy fleets, had never been programmed to handle anything like this chaotic mix of vessels. The first wave included massive Zenthari cargo haulers, ships built for commerce, not combat, but their hulls were reinforced with military-grade armor plating. These weren't just traders who happened to be in the area. They had come prepared for war. Alongside them flew sleek Lixtar patrol boats, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with patterns that Velthar's xenobiology database identified as high-stress combat readiness. But what truly made his blood run cold were the vessels bearing the skull and crossbones insignia of the Void Runners. These weren't just any pirates, they were the most feared raiders in known space, criminals who had spent decades perfecting the art of taking what they wanted from anyone too weak to stop them. Their black ships bristled with weapons that were definitely not legal under any galactic treaty, and their crews were known to sell their own mothers for the right price. Yet here they were, forming protective formations around a human research vessel they had no business caring about. "How is this possible?" Velthar whispered, his voice barely audible over the increasing alarm sounds from his ship's systems. Commander Zixon was working frantically at his station, sweat beading on his scaled forehead as he tried to process the tactical nightmare unfolding before them. "Sir, we now have 74 vessels and counting. I'm identifying species from across the entire sector. Some of these ships were reported as being at war with each other just weeks ago." The communication console suddenly lit up with incoming transmissions from dozens of sources. Multiple languages filled the bridge as alien captains tried to establish contact, their voices creating a babel of sounds that the translation systems struggled to process. Then the main view screen flickered to life again and Captain Boram's face appeared. But this time she wasn't alone on her small bridge. The human captain now stood surrounded by a collection of alien beings that represented a cross-section of galactic civilization. On her immediate left towered a Zenthari captain, whose reptilian features were marked with the deep ceremonial scars that indicated he had survived at least 20 major space battles. His massive frame, easily twice the size of a human, was covered in traditional warrior tattoos that told the story of his victories. His yellow eyes burned with the fierce loyalty of someone who had found something worth dying for. To Boram's right stood a Lixtar warrior, her humanoid form graceful despite the obvious tension in her posture. The neural tendrils that grew from her skull were glowing with bright blue light, a sign that her psychic abilities were fully activated and ready for combat. The Lixtar were known throughout the galaxy for their absolute honesty and their inability to fake emotions, which made her obvious devotion to the human captain all the more significant. Behind them, Velthar could see other figures moving around the cramped bridge space. First Sheksani diplomat, with his distinctive crystalline skin formations, a Theknari engineer whose forearms were busy working on what looked like weapons modifications, and others whose species he couldn't immediately identify. They all moved with the easy familiarity of a crew that had worked together for years, not the awkward cooperation of temporary allies. "Admiral Velthar of the Korthak Empire," Captain Boram said, and the casual way she addressed him by name and rank sent ice through his veins. There was no way she should know his identity. His flagship hadn't transmitted any identification. Codes and Korthak military protocols were strictly classified. "You have two options available to you right now," she continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced impossible odds before and survived. "Withdraw your fleet immediately and return to Korthak space, or try to explain to your high command why you decided to start an interstellar war with half the sector over a simple misunderstanding." Before Velthar could formulate a response, the massive Zenthari captain stepped forward. When he placed his clawed hand protectively on Boram's shoulder, the gesture spoke volumes about the relationship between these unlikely allies. His translation: unit crackled with electronic interference as it struggled to convert his deep rumbling voice into standard galactic. "I am Captain Thexmar of the merchant vessel." "Prosperity," the Zenthari declared, his scarred face twisted into an expression of absolute determination. 3 standard years ago, my homeworld colony was threatened by solar storms that would have killed every living thing on the planet. The evacuation ships couldn't handle the population, and panic was spreading. Then this human appeared with a cargo vessel barely large enough to hold 50 people, and she made 17 trips through radiation that should have killed her entire crew. Boram saved 800 Zenthari children that day, including my own offspring. No Korthak warrior touches her while blood still flows in these old veins. The Lixtar warrior stepped forward next, her neural tendrils now glowing so brightly they cast blue shadows on the bridge walls. When she spoke, her telepathic voice bypassed the communication system entirely, resonating directly in the minds of everyone listening with the eerie clarity that only Lixtar mental projection could achieve. "I am Warsinger Yithara of the patrol vessel Mindreach." Her psychic voice echoed through the consciousness of every being on Velthar's bridge. "When the Crimson Plague struck our nursery worlds 2 years ago, when our younglings were dying by the thousands, and no species would help us because they feared contamination, Captain Boram appeared at our quarantine barrier. She traded her entire ship's supply of advanced life support filters, equipment worth more than most people see in a lifetime, to help us build emergency medical facilities. Her crew breathed recycled air for 2 months while we fought to save our children. We stand with humanity because humanity stood with us when the darkness threatened to consume our future." More alien captains began transmitting their own messages, and each story hit Velthar like a physical blow to his understanding of how the galaxy worked. A scarred Void Runner captain, his face half replaced with cybernetic implants, appeared on a secondary screen. "Name's Kextor, and I don't normally waste time on sentiment or heroics, but 6 months ago my raiding crew got trapped in a collapsing asteroid mine during what should have been a simple salvage operation. Every other ship in the area fled when the rocks started falling. Except for Captain Boram and her people, they spent 18 hours digging us out with mining equipment they had no business knowing how to use. When I asked why they risked their lives for a bunch of pirates, she said something about all sentient life being precious. Crazy human philosophy, but I respect anyone willing to back up their beliefs with action." A Kexani diplomat, speaking from the bridge of an ornate vessel that hadn't left their isolated home system in over 50 years, added his melodious voice to the growing chorus. "The human Boram mediated peace negotiations between our colony worlds and the Theknari mining settlements. She worked without payment for 6 standard months, sleeping in equipment storage areas, eating emergency rations, enduring insults and threats from both sides, all to help 2 species learn to coexist in the same system. The Kexani have long memories for both kindness and debts of honor." The stories continued pouring in from across the impossible fleet. A Silthani pleasure yacht captain whose daughter had been rescued from pirates. A Mordek freight hauler whose crew had been saved from engine failure in deep space. A Velani research vessel whose scientists had been given crucial data that prevented an ecological disaster on their homeworld. Each tale followed the same pattern: humans extending help to strangers without asking for payment, reward, or even recognition. Simple acts of kindness that had somehow created bonds stronger than military treaties or economic agreements. Velthar felt his entire understanding of galactic civilization crumbling around him. In 3 centuries of Korthak expansion, He had seen species cooperate only when forced by superior firepower or bound by profitable contracts. The concept that multiple civilizations would risk everything based on gratitude and genuine friendship violated every principle of interstellar relations he had ever learned. "This is impossible," he muttered, but the evidence surrounded him on all sides. Ancient enemies were flying in formation to protect a single human ship. Pirates were risking their lives for people who had never offered them profit. Diplomats from isolationist worlds were ready to fight alongside merchants and warriors they had never met. Captain Boram's voice cut through his confusion like a blade. "Admiral, you're a career military officer. You understand tactics, logistics, and strategic planning. Take a hard look at your current situation. You came here expecting to find a defenseless research vessel conducting routine surveys. Instead, you've discovered something that threatens the very foundations of everything your empire believes about power and control in the galaxy." She was absolutely right, and Velthar knew it with crystal clarity. His fleet was powerful by any conventional measure, but they were now outnumbered 3-1 by vessels whose crews weren't just following orders or fighting for conquest. They were fighting for something far more dangerous to the established order. They were fighting for friendship, loyalty, and the radical idea that strangers could become family. The Admiral's third eye began to glow with dangerous crimson light. As his rage finally overcame his shock and confusion, he had devoted his entire existence to the belief that strength was the only currency that mattered in the cold vacuum of space. The notion that these soft-skinned humans had somehow made themselves the center of a galactic alliance through simple acts of decency was an insult to everything he had spent 3 centuries fighting to build. "Impossible," he snarled, his voice carrying through the bridge like the roar of some ancient predator. "Battle stations, all ships, assume attack formation, signal the fleet, we engage immediately." Commander Zixon spun around in his chair, staring at his commanding officer in obvious shock. "Sir, respectfully, we are outnumbered 3-1 by vessels carrying unknown weapon configurations. Some of those ships have technology we've never encountered before. Perhaps we should consider—" "I don't care if they outnumber us 10-1. Velthar roared, his claws fully extended as battle fury took complete control of his rational mind. "The Korthak Empire does not retreat from weakness disguised as friendship. We will demonstrate why our name strikes fear into every corner of the galaxy." The die was cast, the decision made. There could be no retreat from this confrontation, no backing down from what had become a fundamental test of competing philosophies. In the cold depths of space, 2 radically different concepts of power were about to collide in a battle that would reshape the political landscape of their entire sector of the galaxy. The ultimate war between conquest and compassion was about to begin. The space around the small research vessel Resilience suddenly transformed into a blazing hell of energy beams, plasma bolts, and exploding metal as Admiral Velthar's fleet opened fire with everything they had. The Korthak Third Fleet unleashed the full fury of their advanced weapon systems, expecting to watch the pathetic collection of alien ships disintegrate under their superior firepower. But instead of the quick massacre Velthar had anticipated, something impossible began to unfold before his 3 eyes. The moment his weapons fired, the seemingly chaotic collection of alien vessels suddenly moved with perfect coordination. Ships that had appeared to be randomly scattered across the battlefield instantly formed defensive formations that looked like they had been practiced for years. The massive Zenthari cargo haulers positioned themselves as mobile shields, their reinforced hulls absorbing the first wave of Korthak fire, while smaller, faster ships maneuvered behind them. And at the center of this impossible dance, the human. Research vessel Resilience underwent a transformation that made Velthar's jaw drop in shock. Hidden panels slid open along its patched and scarred hull, revealing weapon ports that definitely hadn't been there on his initial scans. Plasma cannons emerged from concealed compartments. Missile launchers unfolded from what had appeared to be simple cargo bays, and defensive shield generators came online with a power signature that was far beyond anything a civilian vessel should possess. "What in the 7 hells?" Commander Zixon gasped, staring at his tactical readouts in disbelief. "Sir, that research ship is armed like a military cruiser." Captain Boram's voice suddenly cut through the chaos of battle communications, with crystal clarity, her words reaching every ship in the Allied fleet despite the electronic interference from dozens of different weapon systems firing simultaneously. Zenthari. "Wing, I need you to focus your heavy weapons on their port flank formation," she commanded with the calm authority of a seasoned military commander. "Those 3 cruisers are their anchor point. Take them out, and their entire left side will collapse." Without hesitation, the Zenthari vessels adjusted their positions and concentrated their massive plasma cannons on exactly the targets Boram had identified. Their coordinated barrage slammed into the Korthak ships with devastating precision, overloading shields and punching through armor plating like it was paper. "Lixtar Squadron," Boram continued, her voice never losing its steady composure even as enemy fire exploded around her ship. "Use your speed advantage. Hit and run attacks on their heavy cruisers. Don't try to slug it out. Just keep them confused and off balance." The sleek Lixtar fighters immediately peeled away from the main battle line, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing in patterns that Velthar realized were actually a form of silent communication between the pilots. They streaked through the Korthak formations like schools of deadly fish, their weapons striking at weak points, before dancing away from return fire with impossible grace. "Void Runners," Boram called out, and there was almost a note of affection in her voice. "You know what to do." The pirate ships, their black hulls nearly invisible against the starfield, suddenly seemed to vanish from Velthar's sensors entirely. For a moment, he thought they had fled the battle, abandoning their unlikely allies to face the Korthak fleet alone. Then his ships began exploding from attacks that seemed to come from empty space. The Void Runners were using stealth technology and dirty fighting tactics learned from decades of raiding and piracy. They struck at engine clusters, weapon systems, and shield generators with surgical precision, crippling Korthak vessels before fading back into the darkness like ghosts. What followed defied everything Velthar thought he understood about space warfare. The mismatched collection of alien ships moved like a single living organism, each species' unique capabilities perfectly complementing the other's strengths and covering their weaknesses. The heavy Zenthari vessels provided devastating firepower and served as mobile fortresses that smaller ships could rally around. The nimble Lixtar fighters used their psychic abilities to coordinate attacks with split-second timing, their mental links allowing them to function as a hive mind that could anticipate and counter every Korthak tactical move. The Void Runner pirates struck from unexpected angles with weapons that ignored conventional defensive strategies, and binding it all together was Captain Boram's voice, somehow managing to coordinate the efforts of dozens of different species, with different languages, different technologies, and different fighting styles. She seemed to know exactly what each ship could do, exactly where they needed to be, and exactly when to give each order for maximum effect. At the center of the swirling battle, the Resilience twisted and spun through space with movements that seemed impossible for a ship of its size. Korthak plasma beams that should have vaporized its patched hull somehow slid off its shields or struck reinforced sections that absorbed the damage. Captain Boram was flying her vessel like it was an extension of her own body, threading between enemy fire patterns with instinctive timing that bordered on supernatural. "How are they doing this?" Zixan shouted over the continuous wail of damage alarms that now filled the Korthak flagship's bridge. "These ships have never worked together before. They should be getting in each other's way, causing friendly fire incidents, arguing over tactics." Velthar watched his supposedly superior fleet being systematically torn apart by opponents who moved with the fluid coordination of a veteran military unit. His ships were more advanced, his weapons were more powerful, his crews were better trained, but none of that mattered against enemies who trusted each other with absolute faith. As he watched, a massive Zenthari heavy cruiser deliberately rammed one of his destroyers, the reptilian captain choosing to sacrifice his own vessel to protect a damaged Lixtar fighter that was trying to limp back to safety. The collision created a brilliant fireball that lit up the asteroid field, but even as the Zenthari ship died, its crew was transmitting targeting data to help their allies continue the fight. A squadron of Void Runner ships formed a protective screen around the Resilience, even as Korthak fire began to overwhelm their stolen shields and jury-rigged armor. The pirates, who normally cared about nothing but their own survival and profit, were willingly dying to protect a human captain they had met only hours before. "They trust her," Velthar said in growing wonder and horror, finally understanding what he was witnessing. "By all our ancient gods, they actually trust her completely. Every single ship in that fleet would die before they let anything happen to that human." This wasn't just a space battle between military forces. This was a demonstration of something the galaxy had never seen before: perfect unity between dozens of different species who had no logical, rational reason to trust each other, but who had somehow formed bonds stronger than steel. "Sir, we're losing," Zixan reported, his voice cracking with panic as more Korthak ships disappeared from the tactical display. "We've lost over half our fleet, and the remainder are taking heavy damage. We need to retreat before—" "No retreat," Velthar roared, but even as he gave the order, he could see the inevitable end approaching. His superior technology, his advanced tactics, his overwhelming firepower. None of it meant anything against opponents who fought not for conquest or glory, but for friendship. Velthar stared at the tactical display showing the systematic destruction of his forces, finally understanding the true horror of what his people now faced. The humans didn't just fight wars with better weapons or superior numbers. They had somehow learned to make others willing to die for them, and that made them the most dangerous enemy the Korthak Empire had ever encountered. The final moments of the battle unfolded like a nightmare that Admiral Velthar could never have imagined. The last of his mighty warships drifted through space as burning, twisted metal sculptures, their hulls split open and venting atmosphere into the cold vacuum. Emergency lights flickered weakly inside the shattered vessels, casting eerie shadows on the floating debris that had once been the pride of the Korthak Third Fleet. His own flagship, the massive dreadnought Dominator, was barely holding together. Gaping holes in the hull leaked precious air into space, creating ghostly streams of frozen crystals that caught the light from distant stars. The ship's mighty engines, which had once carried them across the galaxy as conquerors, now sputtered and died one by one, leaving them drifting helplessly among the asteroids. Commander Zixan lay unconscious at his station, his scaled form covered in green blood from wounds sustained when a Lixtar fighter had somehow managed to penetrate their shields and punch a hole through the bridge's armored hull. Half the bridge crew was dead, and the other half worked frantically to keep basic life support functioning for just a few more precious minutes. With shaking claws that could barely grip the controls, Velthar activated the emergency beacon that would carry his final report back to Korthak High Command. The hyperspace transmitter was damaged, crackling with static and electronic interference, but it was their only hope of warning the Empire about what they had discovered here. His three eyes, once bright with the confidence of a career conqueror, were now dim with the terrible knowledge of his complete and utter failure. Everything he had believed about power, about conquest, about the natural order of the galaxy had been shattered in the span of a single battle. "This is Admiral Velthar of the Third Fleet," he spoke into the recorder, his voice hollow and broken with defeat. "I am transmitting my final report on what we encountered in Sector 7 Alpha." He paused, struggling to find words that could adequately describe the impossible thing he had witnessed. Through his cracked view screen, he could see the victorious Allied fleet regrouping around the human research vessel Resilience. But what he saw next made his heart skip a beat. Human medical ships were moving among the wreckage of his fleet, their bright red cross markings clearly visible against their white hulls. These weren't military vessels. They were hospital ships, rescue craft, ambulances of space, and they weren't just rescuing their own wounded allies. "By the ancient gods," Velthar whispered, watching in amazement as human rescue teams worked frantically to pull Korthak survivors from the wreckage of his ships. "They're saving our people too." He watched a human rescue pilot risk her life to extract a wounded Korthak warrior from a collapsing destroyer, the small medical craft's hull scraping against twisted metal as she maneuvered into position. The human didn't hesitate, didn't ask if the Korthak soldier was worth saving. She just acted on instinct to preserve life. "The Third Fleet is gone," Velthar continued his report, his voice growing stronger as he witnessed this final act of human compassion. "Destroyed not by superior weapons or better technology, but by something we never understood. The humans, they're not what we thought they were. They don't conquer worlds through force. They don't destroy their enemies through superior firepower. Another pause as he watched more rescue operations unfold around him. A Zenthari medical ship was working alongside a human vessel to extract survivors from his command cruiser. Former enemies were now cooperating to save the lives of people they had been trying to kill just minutes earlier. "They make friends," he said finally, the words carrying a weight of revelation that shocked him to his core. "And those friends will die for them without question, without hesitation, without reward." I watched Zenthari captains sacrifice their ships to protect human vessels. I saw Lixtar fighters give their lives to save alien species they had never met before today. Pirates and merchants and diplomats all stood together as one unified fleet because a human captain asked them to. The sound of his ship's hull groaning under the stress of battle damage filled the bridge, metal plates shifting and buckling as structural supports finally gave way. He didn't have much time left. "The species that fought here today have been enemies for generations," Velthar continued, his voice growing more urgent as he raced to complete his warning. "The Zenthari and Lixtar have been at war for 2 centuries. The Void Runners trust no one and answer only to profit. The Kexani haven't left their home system in 50 years, yet they all came together, fought together, died together, because they believed in something that humans had shown them." Through the static-filled transmission, the sound of his ship's hull continuing to deteriorate grew louder. Time was running out, and he knew this would be his final message to the Empire. He had served his entire life. By the time you receive this message, it will already be too late to stop what has begun, he said, his voice filled with the weight of prophecy. The humans aren't just joining galactic civilization as another species among many. They're completely rewriting the rules of how civilizations interact with each other. Every world they visit, every species they encounter, becomes part of something larger than themselves. Something we cannot fight because we don't understand it, and we cannot understand it because it's based on concepts that our empire has never valued. A final explosion somewhere deep in the ship's engine section sent shockwaves through the dying vessel. Velthar could feel the artificial gravity beginning to fail as the ship's power systems finally gave up their struggle. "They're teaching the galaxy to be better than it was," he concluded, his voice barely audible over the increasing static. "And for the Korthak Empire, and every other power that rules through fear and strength alone, that makes them the most dangerous enemy we could ever face." The transmission cut out as the Dominator finally succumbed to its massive damage, the great warship breaking apart in a shower of sparks and debris that briefly illuminated the asteroid field like a dying sun. But Admiral Velthar's final warning had already begun its journey across the vast distances of space, carrying news that would change the course of galactic history. 6 months later, the emergency beacon reached Korthak High Command, and the Empire's leaders listened in growing horror to the dead Admiral's final report. But by then, the transformation he had witnessed was already spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. Reports flooded in from 17 different sectors, each one telling the same impossible story. Human colonies were forming defensive pacts with their alien neighbors, creating networks of mutual protection that crossed species lines. Ancient enemies were signing peace treaties with human mediators present to help bridge the gaps between different cultures and customs. Trade routes that had been battlegrounds for centuries were now protected by multi-species patrol fleets, with former pirates working alongside former victims to keep the space lanes safe for everyone. The galaxy's most isolationist species were opening their borders to establish cultural exchange programs with human settlements. The humans had accomplished something that no empire in galactic history had ever achieved. They had begun to unite the fractured, war-torn galaxy not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple revolutionary act of making friends with everyone they met. On a small human colony world called New Harmony, Captain Boram stood in a simple ceremony hall, surrounded by representatives from 47 different species. The gathering looked like something from a dream, or a nightmare depending on your perspective. Zenthari warriors stood beside Lixtar diplomats, Void Runner captains shook hands with Kexani merchants and dozens of other species that had never trusted each other before prepared to make history together. As she watched former enemies shake hands, tentacles, claws, and appendages in genuine friendship, Boram smiled with quiet satisfaction. The document they were about to sign, the first interspecies mutual defense treaty in galactic history, would formally establish what had already begun to happen naturally throughout their sector of space. Today, we prove that the galaxy doesn't have to be a place where strength dominates weakness, she said to the assembled crowd, her words being translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. We can choose to be something better. We can choose to be friends. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, reaching even the most remote corners of civilized space. Billions of beings watched as species that had been at war for millennia put aside their differences and chose cooperation over conflict. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors who ruled through fear, but as the glue that held a fractured galaxy together through the simple power of friendship and mutual respect. And for empires like the Korthak, who had built their power on the belief that only strength mattered, the age of human diplomacy meant that their time of dominance was finally coming to an end. The end